Witnesses say the gunmen shouted, "We have avenged the Prophet Muhammad," as well as "God is great" in Arabic. Mal Fletcher chairs the think tank 2020 Plus, which looks at social affairs and leadership. I'm delighted to say he joins me on the line now. Very good morning to you, Mal.
Good morning, Mike.
What are your first thoughts? What were they when you heard about these attacks?
Well, of course, aside from the pure human reaction, the tragedy of it, the waste of it, I mean, all of these, the young perpetrators were all in their early 30s. We have so many people killed who just went to work that day, or in the case of some shoppers in the Jewish kosher cafe in Paris, just went shopping before the Sabbath and finding out that their lives are under threat. The other thing that occurred to me is that this is an expression of what I call a new brand of fascism that's emerging in Europe. It's relatively new in modern times. It is still political in intent, Mike, but it's linked directly now to religious extremism.
So what issues need to be dealt with to try and stop these kinds of attacks?
Well, I think if you step back from the purely military aspect, if you like, or the policing aspect, I think discussion needs to be had about the effect, the bigger impacts of things like globalization, urbanization, all of which are leading to problems with social cohesion in major cities. So we have more and more people living in smaller spaces who feel they have less and less in common, and that gives rise to forms of tribalism, and some of that is negative. People start searching for others who feel as desperate as they do. I think we've got to look at the poverty issues. France today has 11 million unemployed. Most, or many of them, many of them will be among its 5 million Muslim citizens. Having said that, of course, we can't take away from the personal responsibility for these acts. Plenty of other people are living, less well-off lives in France who didn't decide to become mass killers last week. And I think there's also, Mike, one other thing, and that we need to abandon the idea that political correctness is the default form of political discourse in our country. Churchill showed his generation that fascism isn't made less of a threat just because we talk about it or engage it in debate. We've got to make a stand, be resolute, be defiant about the things that we won't tolerate, and base that stand on proven values and ethics.
Break that down for me. Exactly what are you talking about? What do we do to challenge this?
Well, for example, one of the things that comes out of this is there needs to be a tougher approach to the radicalisation of young people, much more proactive in ensuring that those sorts of things don't take hold. So we may need to be much more active in preventing young men and women from leaving our shores to fight in foreign campaigns. That's what happened in this case. Young men came back having trained, and then were able to carry out these attacks. We may also need to see some sections of the religious community becoming more proactive in dealing with the problem, because, let's be honest, whilst most Muslims in this country, thankfully, are leading peaceful, successful, family-oriented lives, wonderful people, it is true, nevertheless, that the recruits to this new form of fascism are drawn almost exclusively from that section of the religious community. So that has to be addressed. We may need to see some religious leaders taking stronger steps to provide re-education programs for young people in areas where they might be vulnerable to radicalisation.
I have a difficult question for you. I really want to ask you this question to see what your response is. Because there's been a lot of talk in the week about the right to free speech. But the right to free speech does not allow me to run into a cinema and shout fire when there's no fire. It doesn't allow me as a black person or anybody else to call black people by a certain N-word. So should we be looking at the difficulties that Muslims, and this is not a Muslim problem, let's understand this, please, and I'm not making excuses for anything that happened in Paris in the week. But when they say, please do not draw pictures of the Prophet, should we be addressing that in any way?
Yeah, I think we need to. I think we need a lesson in some cases in respect. Yes, I think there's a case to be made for the fact that sometimes we talk more about toleration and not enough about simple human respect. We need to respect other people's views, not go out of our way just to offend for the sake of it, perhaps. But I agree with you that freedom of speech does not mean freedom from accountability or responsibility. And one of the things that fascism always does is it says we want to deny freedom of speech to everyone other than ourselves. I don't think actually that the threat of this week was primarily a threat to freedom of expression. It was a threat to human life. And that's a reality already well known to the millions of people in Syria and Iraq who, for months, in some cases years, have faced the imminent threat of death for no other reason than that they have a different worldview to these, I'm calling them neo-fascist groups.
So how does the future look from where you're standing?
Well, I'm very optimistic about the future, always am. I think it's very important, though, that we don't respond to this immediate threat with abject fear. That leads to a loss of perspective. You can't solve problems when you're, frozen in the headlights. We can't, as a society, sink to hatred because that erodes the soul of individuals and societies. And we can't resort to apathy either, which just allows wickedness to go unaddressed or unpunished. I do think we need to be a lot more honest about our discussion on immigration. This, of course, is one of the attractions of radical political groups, this idea of we're the only ones that will talk to you about immigration. I think Europe needs immigration because we face an aging population and our birth rates are falling all the time. But the question isn't should we allow it, the question is how do we better manage it? And that's an issue we need to continue to have a debate about. I don't think that one's going to go away in a hurry.
Mal Fletcher, who's the chair of the think tank 2020 Plus, always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for taking time to be with us this morning.